Okay, here we are discussing Seinfeld, the opera. I'm joined on the hotline by Doug.
Hey,
Ooh,
what's up?
yeah. Hey. We talked a little bit back and forth, and we kind of accidentally found out. I heard you say to somebody, "This is one of your favorite episodes," or maybe you saw me say it, but
It's
I was like, "This is one of my favorite too."
it's actually not just one of my favorite, it's actually my absolute favorite. It took me a
Mm.
long time to come to this conclusion, but I've actually settled on this, and for the past couple of years, I've been saying that this is hands down my favorite episode.
And I'm pretty. This is like 1A, 1B with me. I feel like this is like within the
That's
top
awesome.
two or three. So perfect marriage right here. You mentioned too that do you want to tell this sort of story first, real quick, before we
No,
actually?
I'm gonna wait to see if
Uh,
we talk about the scene that I'm talking about, and I have a
okay.
personal experience that is basically exactly, well, not exactly, but it's very close to what happened in the episode happened to me in real life.
I'm wondering if it's. You know what I'm think. If I had to guess, I'm gonna say it's Jerry and the guy ripping up the dollars.
You are absolutely correct. So I guess I will tell it, and then we can go into the rest of the episode.
How did I do that?
So this episode features a part where Jerry drops a coin and a guy picks it up, and Jerry's like, "Hey, that's mine. Give it back." And the guy's like, "No, no, it's not. It's mine." And they go through this whole back and forth. Yeah, and then eventually they're both ripping up money to prove how little they care about the coin. And then once Jerry gets really, um, confrontational, the guy literally just acts like it never happened, moves back into line, and just disappears. So there was one time, this is around like 2009. I'm on St. Mark's Place going to a Two Brothers Pizza, if anybody knows what that is,
Somebody
and
will.
somebody will. And I pull my stoner wad out of my pocket to pay, and a $10 bill falls out on the floor. A guy immediately turns around from the counter, like across from the pizza counter. He was sitting there eating against the wall, puts his foot on my money, and picks it up. And I'm like, "Yo, man, what are you doing? That's mine." He's like, "No, it's not. It's mine." And I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" I'm like, "Give me the back right now." And he's like, "What do you mean? I just dropped it." I'm like, "No, you fucking didn't. Give me my money," like starting to get in his face. And he hands it back to me, turns around and starts eating pizza again. Doesn't even say a word. Just looks back and starts eating his pizza.
I thought you were gonna say you guys were ripping up the money, but this is a lot
That,
more realistic.
yes. I wish that it had come to that, but it was just so funny how it was like crazy because he basically said the same thing, like, "No, that's mine." And then once it escalated, he did exactly what the guy did in the show, which was just turn around and get back in line and just like, "We're done."
I always want to do that with the dollars when I would be like having to work like just a long day, like almost 12 hours straight at work or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, you're getting paid." I'm like, I really want to whip out my wallet and be like, "I don't want the money. I just want to go home. Look here, look at this," and
This
just
is how little I care about money.
start ripping up $5 bills or whatever. But it's like just to prove a point. But it's like, well, I could always use those. It wouldn't really be. I wouldn't be like, no one would be at the. I would only be losing in the end at something like that. So
Listen, this is season 4, Jerry. He was doing pretty good. It's not season 1, Jerry.
yeah, good point. Good
He
point.
could rip up his money.
I wrote a lot of notes. I kind of started a We're not going to get to everything I think I wrote because I was writing down like everything because it was so good. So
Oh yeah.
the first thing I wrote down was what Joe Davolo's answering machine message, the hair on the tongue. You know how
It's
much I hate that. And then the I've kiboshed before, I've kiboshed again. It's so good right out the gate.
it's absolutely brilliant, and I love the way it's like super threatening, but then Jerry comes in the apartment just as it ends, and he's just kind of like going about his life all carefree. That to me immediately is such a funny way to do it. Um, One thing I'm gonna say about this intro with Joe Davola, the entire theme of this episode and what I love about it so much is that there's this psychopathic murderer who is really, really unhinged. And we are all just supposed to laugh at it. Like it gets really, really, really dark at points, but it still has a Seinfeld tone. And you're like, how is this even happening?
I
That's what I love
completely
about it. And I
agree.
will say too, before we get further in, that a lot of the things in this episode have been building up since the beginning of the season. So this is the season that involves, Jerry working with NBC and George meeting Susan and stuff like that. So right off the bat, the beginning of this episode with Joe Davola saying all this stuff is left over from previous events of previous episodes.
Good point. And I went and fact checked or whatever you want to call this because I'm always like, when was Elaine and Joe Davola dating? And I wrote down that they meet. I remember that they have this meeting standing outside the building, but I wrote down it's in The Watch. I remember the scene, but I can never remember exactly which
Hmm.
episode it was. But it's from The
Yeah, I
Watch.
don't recall that either. Yeah.
Yeah, I double checked because I wanted to get that straight because it does. I'm like, we never see them ever go out on a date or whatever, which I feel like would be so weird to watch, you know. So maybe
That
it's a good
would
thing
be
we didn't see it.
I was thinking about that too in the episode. This episode actually has a lot of things that you don't see that are spoken about. So one of them is, Elaine dating Joe. I want to see how they went on a date, how Elaine got to 3 dates with this guy. Like how did that even happen? I assume that he was putting on some level of charm because he's a sociopath. But another thing that's not seen is the fact that Joe Davola was angry at Jerry because he believed that Jerry had kind of sabotaged him getting a show at NBC. So you kind of find out that Joe Davola is a comedian similar in a similar field to Jerry, and he's going for a pilot on a show too. And I was just like, I really want to see Joe Davola's stand up. I want to see his idea for a television show.
I I have a feeling that he doesn't do stand up. He's just like a straight writer. Um,
That could
I'm
be
I'm not. They don't really delve into it, but
crime fiction, maybe.
there's but yeah, I don't know how he'd be writing like a comedy. Maybe he's writing something like NYPD Blue or something, you know. um, but there's a line some in either this episode or a previous episode where where he says Joe Davola and somebody maybe a George says who's that and he goes, oh, this writer that Kramer's friends with or something like some kind
Oh,
of
I see. I see.
yeah, they drop a line like that real quick. Um, what I think is so interesting about this is there's a lot of episodes where it's just the Seinfeld crew go somewhere, the movie, the airport, the whatever.
Yes.
This is one of those, but all those episodes are about like just the typical things you would do there. This isn't that. It's like they go to the opera, but also, yeah, there's a stalker chasing them, which is completely not like it's not like the movie episode. It's just we're trying to all meet at the movie, but there's not a killer
Yeah,
after
it's not like
them. Yeah.
relatable things that happen to you at this place.
Jerry says, "Why are they even singing? Who sings? If you got something to say, say it." It's such a weird
Well,
thing
they
to
all they
say.
all sing, and that's how they all communicate in Italy. They all sing. That's what Kramer says.
Yeah, like yeah, like there's just and every single line of dialogue is like almost I could have wrote down. And this
That's why it came to be one of my favorites because of how many jokes are actually featured in it.
when Elaine comes in, like they're dropping all this like these story beats, like we're gonna meet up, we got the tickets. Oh, I don't have the tickets here, and she's like, I gotta go give them to Joey. And they don't really call a lot
Yeah,
of attention to it. She's getting a little bit irritated. She washes her hands and then dries them on Jerry's shirt. Did you catch that? I feel like that's kind of
I actually didn't catch that.
if you don't it's right around when she says it's nice to be into someone that's interested in something other than Nick at night. It's right around there.
Oh,
She's
okay.
like
I was paying so much attention to the Nick at Night line, thinking about Jerry watching Nick at Night, what shows he would have been interested in, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't pay attention to the details.
you can see like he's wearing one of those his typical like dress shirts and Elaine grabs like the bottom two flaps or whatever and is like using them as a towel. But she drops the Nick at Night line and then she also drops oh, after he sings the song in front of the opera, she says you learn all your like you get all your information from Bugs Bunny or something like that.
Yes,
You're
I did um, notice the juxtaposition of that. The funny thing is that during this year, Nick at Night technically featured Looney Tunes because at 8 p.m. Eastern time in the early 90s, there was like a kind of a bridge from Nickelodeon to Nick and Night. So at 8 o'clock they would play Looney Tunes, and the last part of the Looney Tunes show would be a black and white one, kind of like a Bosco cartoon.
Hmm.
They would bridge into Nick at Night. So there is a chance that Jerry could have been watching Bugs Bunny as part of Nick at Night, essentially.
I thought about that too. Actually, it kind of is. I'm like, oh, Bugs Bunny probably was on that Nick at Night. Like that's kind of what
Right.
Nick at Night was back then, right? Because they didn't have. I don't remember ever watching Nick at Night, so I can't really give an example. Like I don't know if it was that or something more like the
Back
Golden
then,
Girls.
back then it was really old stuff like Dobie Gillis and Mr. Ed. It was all like 50s and
Mm,
60s shows.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and they would start. So it wasn't always like this at the beginning of Nick at Night. I mean, we're going on a real tangent Nick at Night, but
That's
in the
okay.
90s they would do, you know, I guess it was like they were trying to get kids to stick around and watch it. So they would start out showing the cartoons and bridge them into older cartoons before it went into the old TV shows. And, honestly, it made me watch a lot more Nick at Night because of it.
Okay, yeah, I must have missed somehow. I missed Nick at Night completely. I feel like. Hmm.
You're very lucky.
I don't know about that, but um, we have the there's multiple we see Joe Davola with the we cut to his apartment by himself, like the answering machine method we talked about, then him lifting
Yeah.
weights while he's crying, which is funny. But I think the
Right
funniest one
after,
is the candle.
oh yeah, just screaming with his hand burning. This is right after though. So after the Nick at Night line, Elaine talks about how Joe Davola has like a grip on reality and he's so well adjusted.
Oh,
And right then it cuts right into, you know, the opera music playing while he's just losing it.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, he's such a normal, nice guy. He's not like you. And then cut to him acting like a unhinged maniac. So good
Yeah.
comedic beats
And in,
right
in
there.
that scene too, you see the pictures of Elaine.
Yeah, there. I noticed that too when he's lifting weights. They're like right behind him because it's sort of like
Yeah.
the camera's up, like above him, facing down. He's sort of he's like staring up at the ceiling in like a
Yeah,
bench press
it's
position.
really easy to miss them. I didn't, I've watched this episode many times, but
I
I don't
saw
remember
them
when
this
I noticed
time.
that, but it was not early on. There's a lot of things to miss in this episode. There's actually one big thing that we'll get to later, I'm sure.
That whole scene where it's like a horror movie scene where she's trapped in his apartment. The I'm a day person. That whole
Yeah.
scene is it's funny. It's not really. It's not technically supposed to be funny. I mean, I don't know how to word
She
it. It's
keeps
it's
it
like
she keeps
terrifying.
it being funny, but it
Yeah,
is so dark. He is literally trying to trap her. First he tries to get her to go into the dark room,
yeah,
and then, you know, he like presses the door back. He's constantly, and then he's calling her Netta, like
yep,
in the Pagliacci, and talking about how Netta cheated on her husband and what the guy did to her because of that. And she's like, I'm Elaine. And then he like literally at the end slams the door and is like, "You're not leaving." And
yeah.
that's when, she blasts him in the eyes, which what we will later find out is Cherry Banaka.
And then I might not have made this full connection. I noticed it the last few times I've seen this when yeah, she's saying like he kept calling me Netta, and then in this scene she's like, "What? Who's Netta?" But then when they all sit down right before that starts, they're reading the program, and she's
Hmm.
like, "So and so's playing Netta." She's like, "Oh!" It kind of dawns on her at the very in like the last kind of beat of the episode.
Exactly. Yeah.
I laugh when she goes because the guy who plays Joe Dole is so straight about it. She goes, "You don't seem yourself," and he's just a deadpan. Who am I? Like it's so scary.
I love that too. It is frightening, but then she just like makes the very Seinfeld jokes about it, like, "Oh, it's very existentialist. Like, who am I? Who's anybody? You know?"
She does one of those classic right before the dark when he first says to go in the dark room. She does one of those classic like she's clearing her throat like silently before she says something that she always does.
Oh yeah, she is really good at that.
The one thing I wrote down the one thing in this episode I don't find funny, and it's only like a minute of the episode, is the
Mhm.
how they talk about the how George made this bad toast at this wedding. and it goes
So
on for a minute. It's like kind of pointless. I never liked this joke.
so this is kind of out of left field, and you're like, what? And they talk about how stupid the toast is, and he was cursing like Red Fox. But later on, when George is scalping the tickets,
Yeah, he runs into that guy. I still don't find it funny
he
though.
runs into that guy, and I'm telling you, the first 10 times I saw this episode, I did not know that he was supposed to be that guy they were talking about
Oh,
because it's so poorly delivered early on in the episode.
yeah,
But when that guy, and then she's like, "Oh no, your hair implants," and
that
then
made me
later on,
laugh.
that was hilarious. And when she's wandering around behind Jared and Elaine, she's going, "A doctor? Does anybody know a doctor?"
Yeah, for his hair
I
implants, or
absolutely
does
love
he
that.
actually like injured? She thinks. I don't know.
I don't know, but yeah, I did not know who that guy was like so many times, and then like it wasn't this watch, but it was at some point it clicked for me, like holy shit, like you
I'm gonna
know,
say yeah. I didn't get that at first either. I don't know
because
when I did, but eventually I did put the connection
there's got to
together.
be maybe was he calling Mr. Layton? Because in the original scene it's like Bobby Layton's wedding, and then later on he's like Mr. Layton, but it's like they say the name Bobby Layton only once. So it's like how the heck, I mean the guy does say something like I knew you were, but it's a reach. It's not so easily noticeable.
Yeah, it doesn't. It. I mean, like I said, it's like they do set it up, and then they do run into him. It feels kind of unnecessary. We already have like George with Harry Fong and stuff, which I think is a little bit smoother. Maybe the episode was just like running like 2 minutes short, and they had to like add a little something.
Or
I don't know.
maybe it actually had a little more,
Oh, that too.
but they
Yeah,
had
yeah.
to take stuff out. That's actually what I was thinking, is that because there's only two details about this person, I was thinking maybe the episode was too long and there was actually something more with this man, but that had to be removed. So then it's like now we're just left like, what the heck, you know? It could be either way.
I wrote the fact that Jerry doesn't put it together that Elaine's boyfriend Joey is Joe Davola and vice versa. Elaine doesn't know crazy Joe Davola is
Hmm.
Joey. It's if you don't watch the show all the time, maybe it might seem like how is that possible? But I think if you watch this season from like in order, it does make. I'm like you know sometimes you don't meet pre cell phones and stuff and pre looking at
Oh yeah.
photos all the time. You don't know what everybody's people that they know look like, I guess, right?
And
So
she's mostly saying Joey, he's saying Joe, and they aren't talking about it that much. It's not a main focus of their lives. It's happening in the fringe of their lives. And I like the way that they don't know and like slowly find a little bit more and a little bit more.
yeah, and it's like in Elaine when this is right after she's been away too in Paris, I think. So there's definitely
Yes.
periods probably where even though the show sort of has to fit a weekly thing, there's probably times when Elaine and Jerry don't hang out for like a couple months at a time. We think probably in like the reality of the show, you know. So you know
Yeah.
he doesn't need to he doesn't need to see everybody. It's the same scene we talked about with the where the Jerry and that guy are shoving each other. Well, almost. And Elaine's like,
Yeah.
"I'm not his girlfriend." Well, we dated for a while. It didn't work out. Like, no need for that to be added in there, but it's
Right. But this
great.
is still early on when that was brought up. Eventually in the show, that's kind of it gets brought up less and less.
Yeah, it's funny to just no need to add that extra information to total strangers or whatever.
Yeah, right.
It's like oh this is it's like you and your girlfriend. It's like well actually we just broke up but we're still hanging. It's like no one wants to hear
I
this.
think I think maybe she was saying that a little extra here because Joe Davola, remember, was accusing her of cheating on him.
Mm,
So I think that had to do with her being like, "Oh no, I'm definitely not together with this person, just in case." You
he's
know,
behind them.
I think it might be related to that.
It could be, yeah. Then I'm down to like the very end where there's a nice little like double setup, double payoff when they're scalping the tickets, and then when they sit down, you see George and Harry Fong. It's not even really his name. That's what he says his name is. I keep saying it.
Yeah, yeah, he just
Um,
guesses.
he says they agree on 250, and he slips him the ticket, and he just walks away. And then like a couple minutes later, when they sit down, Jerry says to him, "Hey, how much did you pay for that?" And he says 175. It's like a subtle little joke,
Yeah.
like it's not even the same amount.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like George was trying to act like he got more for it. That's a very George thing to do.
Yeah, and then they ask and then the setup, we never actually, I don't know if we ever see what happens when Joe and Kramer are talking in the alleyway. He doesn't know that it's Joe Davola, and then that right after the Harry Fong 175, they're like, "Well, who did you sell your ticket to?" And he says some nut in a clown suit, and all of a sudden they're like,
I
"Oh fuck."
I love that part. What I love about it is that so they create this whole terrifying episode. There's even like, you see how tough Joe Davola is throughout things. He's even beating up guys in the park with his like karate moves and everything. You know, they run into him outside when they're like, "Oh, do you smell cherry?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's Banaka." And then they run away, and now like he's finally gonna get them. He has a seat right next to them, and they're all screaming, and that's it. It's over.
Perfect. Yeah,
And
good way to end
it's
it.
just left to your imagination what happens.
I wrote that down too in my notes, but we didn't. I was like, we don't have to get to everything I wrote down, but I wrote down when he beats up those three guys in the park. It's just awesome. I don't know
It's just like
why.
an awesome action sequence that never existed in Seinfeld before.
Yeah, all the and never in Seinfeld would you expect to see a guy do like a sweep kick and a roundhouse kick, but here we go.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
I don't. I like I said, we don't have to cover everything, but that's everything I wrote down. But the
I
episode's so.
think we
We didn't
have,
even
I mean,
talk
there's
about
so
the.
many. Which one?
I was gonna say we didn't talk about like George has the suit that's too small. Like there's a bunch of other things. Like there's so much like
That
stuff.
does sort of pay off when George talk George tells Susan, we find out that he went home because he was uncomfortable, and now Jerry ends up being the only one wearing the tux, sitting there at the place, and he's uncomfortable. I do predict that at the end of this episode, after they find out that Joe Davola is coming over and that Jerry's the only one wearing the tux and he's now uncomfortable, that at that moment they left the opera,
Makes sense to me. Yeah,
right?
yeah.